Hi everyone, welcome to my presentation today on Wim Hof breathing. Over the past year, I have been working on this project for my honors thesis, and I'm very excited to be sharing the project with you for the first time ever today. So, a little bit of background on me. Most of you guys know, but I'm a senior graduating next month. I've been studying cognitive science here at UC Berkeley, and my project has been on as the name suggests, Wim Hof Breathing Method evokes changes in mental states. This was an exploratory study. So my goals for the presentation are to basically tell you the story about how I got interested in this project in the first place. I'm going to explain some of the project, how I went about it. And one of the biggest goals that I have for this lecture is to make all of the biological information that's discussed available and understandable to everybody regardless of their background in biology. And also to inspire you to breathe, because it's a very cool thing that's free for all of us. So I'll start with a little bit of background of how I got interested in this project, and basically I'm really interested in a holistic view of health. I'm very interested in human health optimization. So I like this kind of integrative approach to health and consciousness, which is tying together the mind, the body, and the soul, or the part of us that is non-physical. And I believe that all of these things connect through the breath, this kind of bridge that brings mind, body, and the non-physical all together. So I think it was 2019, I went to a holotropic breathwork workshop in Venice Beach, California. And there I went through the process of the holotropic breathwork, which was a breathwork process that was created by Stan Grof. Many of you know Stan Grof and his work. In this experience, I had a transcendent experience, basically, doing the breath work, and it really just evoked a lot of curiosity in my mind and made me wonder about how this was possible to leave my body, so to speak. It felt as though I left my body and experience a transcendent state just by altering my breath. So that inspired me to kind of look further into it. And at the time, I was taking Mind, Brain, and Behavior, or is that right? Brain, Mind, and Behavior by Dr. Presti. So I went to office hours and I spoke with Dr. Presti, and I asked him, told him about my experience, and I asked him, if he could give me any advice as to how to interpret this information. And so one thing led to another, and we pretty much got into a position where he and I talked, and I ended up doing my research project with him. So that's a little bit of background as to what inspired me. It was originally holotropic breathwork. However, during COVID-19, holotropic breathwork is it must be done in a rigid kind of manner with a proper facilitator who's been certified by the Grof Foundation, or Stan Grof certified. And it just was the logistics of having people do Wim Hof or holotropic breathwork during COVID at home was not an easy thing to do. So I was thinking about the other sorts of breathwork techniques that are similar, and Wim Hof method is very similar in some sense. We do cyclic hyperventilation and Wim Hof breathing, and I figured that this could be a comparable breathwork to use for this study and for this project. And at the same time, I was also really interested in Wim Hof and his whole technique and method. So a little bit of background, because most of you have probably heard of Wim Hof, but if you haven't, he's a Dutchman, extreme athlete. He's known for setting these crazy world records. I think his Wikipedia title used to be professional daredevil or something like that, so it's pretty cool. And he's done these things like swimming 60 meters underneath ice, running half marathon barefoot north of the Arctic Circle, and climbing Mount Kilimanjaro in shorts. So this is just gives you a certain sense of who created this breathwork technique and what he's done. One of the things I really liked about Wim Hof while looking deeper into him and and his work is that he actively invites scientists to come and study him, and wants people to, he wants his process to be under scientific supervision so that there's no doubting that it's real. And I really like that about him. So what I have here is just a little video. You guys, some of you may know Yes Theory on YouTube. This is just a short clip that I wanted to play that kind of gives you a bit of background on Wim Hof and some of his method that we'll get into more in the presentation.
Right now we're about to do finally the breathing. He's going to be leading the team for about 45 minutes.
Okay, are you relaxed? Move your body a little, shake it. Okay. Get the shit out, I'm here, I wake up. I'm gonna do my best, and everybody's gonna possibly do 3 minutes without air in the lungs. So think and feel as if you fill up your belly, through your mouth or nose, doesn't matter. Fully in, then the chest, and then into your head, and then you let it go. Belly, chest, head, let it go. Belly, chest, head, let it go. Belly, chest, head, let it go. Pull it in like the sea, waves on the shore. Yeah, let it go. Let it go. This is the round number 1. If you feel lightheaded, losing the body, tingling, it's all alright. Breathe into it. Intensify. Whatever you feel, intensify. And 3, fully in.
As we're finally starting to learn the method, I think it might be a good time to explain what it consists of. There's 3 main components: breathing, meditation, and gradual cold exposure. And its main objective is to awaken the deeper parts of the brain that Wim claims we've lost control over. First, Wim's meditation technique differs from traditional practices by preparing the mind and body to stay strong and calm during situations of stress when the fight or flight response is activated. He then gradually takes people through cold exposure. Countless independent studies have shown that cold exposure boosts the immune system and decreases inflammation in the body, which is also why pro athletes use it all the time for recovery, but Wim believes the cold can do so much more. And lastly, his breathing technique is designed to take deep inhales and gentler exhales in order to take in more air than we're letting out. This allows your body to function at a higher level than normal and can get you to hold your breath for 3 to 4 minutes. This process can in some cases cause a wide variety of physical and emotional responses.
Okay, so you get a sense of what Wim Hof breathing looks like from this video. In this slide, I want to just talk about what exactly is going on during this breathwork technique, and I'll just do kind of a very brief demonstration, which is that we're going to get comfortable. So we sit down. We don't need to all do it, but yeah, you basically are sitting down comfortably. You could be lying down. You could be sitting down, and this breathwork process is broken up into really 3 parts. We're going to basically, you do 20 to 40, 30 to 40 deep inhalations. This is cyclic hyperventilation, so we're hyperventilating in a cyclical manner. And in this process, you kind of can close your eyes, you get in touch with yourself, you're just doing really deep breathing, you're forcing air in, but letting air out. And after you do 30 to 40, or you could do 20 deep breaths, you take one last full inhale, and then exhale completely, stop, and then you hold. And this is part of the breath retention. There's a lot of talk of retention of breath in pranayama breathing, which is Indian style of breathing, and there's a lot of different sub kind of divisions within pranayama. Bhastrika is one that is very similar to Wim Hof breathing, they all kind of center around having this retention. But anyway, after you do this retention, it's at this breath hold that people are able to hold their breath for 3+ minutes without air in the lungs. I think that's pretty cool. And then you do a recovery breath where you fully inhale, let the air come back into your lungs, maybe hold for 15 seconds, let go, And that's 1 round. And so in order to reap the benefits of this breathwork technique, Wim suggests we do 3 to like 4, even 5 plus rounds of that exact cycle. And I'll tell you, it's not easy to do. It's actually kind of like difficult. Like a lot of you guys have done it before. If you're just sitting there by yourself, it's kind of like, it almost feels like you're working out, really. It's not that easy, but that's what they were doing in that video that made them get to that kind of very interesting emotional responses and things of that sort. So now I want to talk about the nervous system a little bit, and just we're going to start to get a bit into some of the biology. And just to ground us, like I said at the beginning of this lecture, I want to make this extremely available and accessible to everyone regardless of your background. This is a tree of the mammalian nervous system that you don't often see in when you just look up like nervous system, because they don't often include the enteric system, and it's a little bit more true to what the nervous system is as opposed to these more simplified versions. So in the nervous system, we have like 2 main branches, the central nervous system and the peripheral nervous system. And also, just to back up for a second, when we talk about brain, brain is just one aspect of the nervous system. The nervous system is, the brain is part of the nervous system. So when we talk about brain, we really have to talk about nervous system. Okay, so central nervous system, this is brain and spinal cord. Peripheral nervous system, these are, this is not everything that's not brain and spinal cord. And you may have heard in classes of efferent and afferent neurons, these are motor neurons and sensory neurons. When we go into these motor neurons, these are neurons that go towards the brain. Away from the brain, my bad. Afferent goes towards, efferent goes away. So now we have a further kind of breakdown of these nervous systems, somatic and autonomic. And it's in this autonomic nervous system that we're going to focus. Within the autonomic nervous system, we have the parasympathetic, the sympathetic, and the enteric nervous system. Enteric is really involved in digestion, and it's kind of up and coming. A lot of research is being done on it. It previously has not been researched as much as sympathetic and parasympathetic. But you often hear, right, and so we're going to be focusing on autonomic nervous system. And now let's zoom into autonomic nervous system, looking at specifically sympathetic and parasympathetic nervous system and what are the differences and how can we think about this with regards to Wim Hof breathing. Just very broad strokes. Sympathetic we often hear about as fight or flight, and parasympathetic we often hear about as rest and digest nervous system. And the body is always in this kind of teeter between these 2 aspects of the nervous system. And so, you know, things that are fear-inducing salient stimuli that kind of take you out of the moment, these are going to stimulate the sympathetic nervous system. And I will say, I know it's a little confusing because it sounds like sympathetic's like you sympathize, it should be nice and sweet, but it's actually the opposite. Here we have like increased heart rate, vasoconstriction. Here it's going to be the opposite, vasodilation, reduced heart rate. There's some things that perhaps you may have heard of in Dr. Presti's class. He talks about with the eye pupils dilating versus contracting, and also urination and things of this sort are implicated in this teetering of the nervous system. So now what I want to do is briefly, for those of you who did do the optional reading, I just want to touch on this very briefly and then get back to my study, but it's relevant at this point in the lecture. If any of you saw or skimmed through this, this is an article that's been very inspirational to me for my research, and also just as a prospective scientist in general. This has been an incredible research study. What this is, I'll just briefly summarize what happened here, is these researchers in the Netherlands, they basically got a group of 24 participants, and they said, we're going to inject you with an endotoxin. This is an E. coli bacteria. And these people, volunteers, they volunteered to be part of the study, to be injected with a bacteria. It makes them very quickly get sick, not feel good. You have flu-like symptoms for a short period of time and it goes away. And what they wanted to see is Wim Hof method able to blunt the response that the body would have naturally when injected with this E. coli versus a control group that did not do any sort of Wim Hof training. So Wim Hof took half of the participants, 12 participants, a group of 24, brought them to his place in the Netherlands They went through meditation training, cold exposure therapy, and breathwork technique training. After this 10 days, they brought them back to the research facility. They were placed back with the group of 24. Everyone was injected with this E. coli voluntarily. During the period of time that the symptoms started to arise, the people who did this Wim Hof training, they also started to do the cyclic hyperventilation that we were just talking about, the Wim Hof Breathing Method. And what is so insane about this study and really inspirational to me is that the present study demonstrates that through practicing techniques learned in a short training program, the sympathetic nervous system, right, fight or flight, and the immune system can be voluntarily induced. I should have mentioned this before, but prior to this research, people thought that you cannot voluntarily influence the sympathetic nervous system or the autonomic nervous system more generally. So this is a really big deal because this study provides mechanism of how Wim Hof breathing method is working, and we'll ask, how is it working? These are the mechanisms. We have cytokines in our body. These are immune proteins, part of the immune system, and they can influence cell processing. IL-10 is interleukin-10 is an anti-inflammatory cytokine. The people who did this Wim Hof breathing, when they got injected, their levels, so the researchers took blood plasma from the people and they measured various catecholamines and looked for cytokines as well. And they found that the interleukin-10, which is an anti-inflammatory cytokine, was increased in the breathing group. And then pro-inflammatory cytokines, interleukin-6, interleukin-8, and TNF-alpha, which is tumor necrosis factor alpha, were decreased in the breathwork group. And so what's so exciting to me is that this is an alternative healing modality. And this is not mainstream, right? And a lot of times, when we talk about these things that are not mainstream, Western folks here in the West, they are not satisfied until we have some science to back it, something to explain how is this happening, because otherwise you just cast off, oh, it's wishy-washy, it's this and that. To me, this is a huge deal because now we can point to mechanism and we can say, look, this is what's happening when you do Wim Hof breathing physically in the body. Now, I took this idea and I said, okay, we know what's happening physically in the body as far as these cytokines go, and they also measured catecholamines, epinephrine, and various other transmitters. And I didn't include that here, but as I said, I want to continue on with my study. One of the things that motivated me the most about this is that we know there's physical changes happening. What's happening cognitively, right? I'm studying now, have been studying cognitive science, so I want to know what's happening emotionally, psychologically, and on the level of cognition. And that's the question really that I came to the table with here. So here we enter just a little bit of basic evolutionary neurobiology, neuroscience. This is the Triune brain model. It's a model that I've really looked to as I've studied the brain. And what this model kind of shows, and it's what's so beautiful, is that we can see that this, and this was, by the way, presented by Paul MacLean in 1960, it shows that the brain is topographically, evolutionarily grown. We can see the evolutionary process of the brain. Lizards and lower animals, I hate to use that word, lower animal, but less evolved animals, they have similar brain structures as us. And the parts that are similar oftentimes are found here in the brainstem. And then we ask naturally, well, what is the brainstem responsible for? This is respiration, heart rate. These are basically functions of the nervous system that are innate. We don't think about, they're not cognitive. They keep the body functioning. As we move forward and we go to the next layer on top of the brainstem and the cerebellum, which is also like balance and equilibrium and things of the sort, we move to limbic system. And limbic system is oftentimes associated with fear, but it's not just fear, it's emotional responses, it's salient stimuli activate nervous system, limbic system. And then we go to neocortex, which is what, people point to humans saying we have the most evolved cortex. This is the part of the brain that separates us from lower primates and things of the sort. So what we want to focus on here, just to orient us, is we're focusing here on brainstem because this is respiration. But as we'll see, it turns out that a lot of these brain regions are implicated in Wim Hof breathing method. So when I first started this study, I knew that I wanted to approach it from the perspective of neuroendocrinology, because that's been one of my most favorite things to study here at Berkeley. And this is a diagram that I borrowed from my Andy's old professor, Dr. Lance Kriegfeld, here at UC Berkeley, one of like the world premier endocrinologists, and an amazing guy. So I just want to briefly describe what is actually happening in the brain when we're doing Wim Hof Breathing Method. And this is what's happening. So here we can see the brain. We see this is pons right here, medulla and brainstem, cerebellum. And when you do the cyclic hyperventilation, and then you do the retention, specifically on the retention, this is when you do the hyperventilation, you're actually bringing more oxygen into your body, and in doing so, you raise the pH level of your blood. And that was another finding from that study. So I think normal pH is around like 7.35. Wim Hof breathing can get up to like 7.45. Don't quote me on the numbers, but it's something like that. It doesn't sound that significant, but it makes a difference when you're holding your breath. And when you do this retention, there's this weird paradox that happens in the body where your brain recognizes there's no air in the lungs, but you don't have the need to breathe. So what happens is your brain sounds an alarm to the limbic system from the pons. This is respiration, and then limbic system is, amygdala, fear, stress. So there's no air in the lungs. We're doing the 3-minute breath hold, and we send this signal, and it's like, help, help. The body is not breathing. We need to sound the alarms. And so here we have hypothalamus. And some of you may have heard, I know Andy has a hypothalamic pituitary adrenal axis. HPA axis is our stress axis, is often referred to. You hear about it in major depressive disorder and various psychiatric disorders, that there's malfunction of HPA axis. And what this axis is responsible for doing is secreting, as you see here, so basically just go through this cascade that medulla, pons, lower brainstem, spinal cord, they alert the hypothalamus specifically, not that it really matters here, but the paraventricular nucleus of the hypothalamus. And this causes the secretion of corticotropin releasing hormone CRH. This is just a hormone that it's being released from the hypothalamus into the anterior pituitary, which is the little glands that sit underneath the hypothalamus. This CRH, this hormone, binds to the receptors in the anterior pituitary, which leads to the secretion of adrenocorticotropic releasing hormone, or ACTH. ACTH, as you can see here, travels down from anterior pituitary onto the adrenal glands, which sit on top of the kidneys. Into this specific melanocortin-2 receptors get activated, and so on and so forth. Zona fasciculata, this is not relevant for this, at the moment for this, but the main point is that this causes the stimulation of glucocorticoid production, so cortisol in humans. And so we're releasing cortisol from adrenal glands, and at the same time, these catecholaminergic cells in the adrenal medulla, which are inside of the adrenal gland, are releasing epinephrine. So we have this kind of chemical cocktail that is being released when we're doing Wim Hof breathing, that we're activating HPA axis, and in doing so, we're stimulating, literally in our stomachs here, stimulating epinephrine and cortisol release, which are stress-inducing hormones. And what do these really play a big part in? Activating sympathetic nervous system. So we're basically activating sympathetic nervous system response while doing Wim Hof breathing method. So one last kind of biological component that I want to touch on is mitochondrial function and what's happening to the mitochondria when you do Wim Hof breathing method. I'm really interested in mitochondria and mitochondrial health optimization. One of my favorite researchers is Dr. Doug Wallace out of the Children's Hospital in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. He's a really interesting guy, and he's shown just amazing research. He does a lot of YouTube talks and stuff if you guys are at all interested. But basically, these mitochondria are all inside of the cell. I think there's like somewhere between 50 and like 200 mitochondria in each cell. And they have their own DNA. Fun fact, a lot of people don't know. Turns out their DNA is involved in a lot of issues that can arise with humans. people don't often look to the mitochondria. But what's cool about mitochondria, and you may have heard or remember from high school biology, is that they're the powerhouse of the cell. You know, yeah. So they're producing ATP, and that's the cellular currency that our bodies need to have energy. And so this ATP is really important. And one of the building blocks that these mitochondria need to make ATP is oxygen. So when we deprive ourselves of oxygen, when we don't have enough oxygen, our mitochondria have trouble producing ATP, and this can lead to a whole host of problems. But when we hyperoxygenate the blood, like with Wim Hof Breathing Method, then these mitochondria get very happy because they have all of these building blocks to work with to make more ATP. And so doing this Wim Hof Breathing Method theoretically would lead to greater oxygen availability and more ATP production, and that's just what I wanted to, and that has a huge amount of benefits for the body and the immune system and all sorts of systems throughout the body. So now that we've done this kind of extensive background, thank you for staying with me, we're gonna get into what I actually did for my study. Okay, so this is what I did. This is my kind of experimental little flow chart. I had a set of preliminary questions that I asked. I got 10 participants for this study. It was technically a pilot study. I was thinking about doing more, but COVID and there was challenges to analyzing data, and I really was kind of doing this on my own. So having just 10 participants was like a safe and friendly starting place for me. Yes, they were randomly assigned to two groups, a Wim Hof intervention group and a control group. This ended up working out like this because of the randomizer on Qualtrics. I would have liked further to have been 5 and 5, but we had 6 participants in control and 4 participants in Wim Hof group. After they went through this intervention, so they answer questions, survey, then they go into the intervention, and then they go through another survey, and then I analyze results. And that's basically the design of my study. And so the dimensions that I looked at, because this is an exploratory study, I chose these dimensions to observe for this study. Those are physical sensations, what's happening physically in the body, what do they feel doing these different interventions. Shifts in emotional states, so we'll get into these more in detail, but visions, did they experience any visions while doing this? Awe and astonishment, heightened sense of awareness, and perceived feelings of connection to the world. So these are taking the knowledge and the understanding from that previous study that we just talked about, and then thinking about how can I look at like really valuable cognitive and psychological components and study them in this study. That's what this is all about here. So we're just going to go straight here to results. Okay. So on the left we have Wim Hof group, and on the right we have the paced breathing intervention group. Real quick before we get into this, obviously these are kind of the big deal, big difference here. But before we just talk about this, I want to mention that these control group, they didn't do nothing. They had actually a video that they were assigned to watch. And instead of it being like this cyclic hyperventilation, it was really just simple, sit, watch this little YouTube video. It's 10 minutes. They were both 10-minute long videos. And then follow this kind of guided breathing video. And it's just very slow pace, like breathe in, breathe out, breathe in, breathe out, that kind of thing. So what did we find with physical sensations? This is like a pretty, significant finding. Wim Hof people, I mean, it's to be expected really, just based on anecdotal evidence, but they reported a lot of tingling and buzzing feeling throughout the body. And personally, I don't have hard evidence to support this, but I think this could be a result of, on one hand, the hyperoxygenation of the blood, but in as well, like the mitochondrial ATP production, causing this really intense thing. Anyway, with the folks that did the paced breathing intervention, kind of like complete opposite. You can see like they were just super relaxed and calm. So that's a big deal difference here. Changes in emotional states. Interesting finding that a lot of people in both groups said that there was a significant change in emotional state, regardless of if they were doing Wim Hof or the paced breathing control. So that was a pretty interesting finding. Visions, 0 reported visions whatsoever. This was also kind of surprising to me, just because holotropic breathwork is known to induce intense visual, I don't want to say hallucinations, but visions. And there was nothing reported in either group for this, which was a little surprising to me. For awe and astonishment, I will mention that Dr. Keltner, who was one of my advisors on this project, his definition in one of his papers of what awe is an emotional response to perceptually vast stimuli that transcend current frames of reference. So that's the definition that we were going on here. And as you can see, this is a little bit of mixed results. 50% of Wim Hof group reported that they did experience awe, 50% said no, and everybody in paced breathing control was on the negative kind of end of things, or uncertain. But because of the small, sample size that I had, I feel like this is a question that's worth further exploring. If we had, for example, like 20 or even 40 participants, then I think that this would really become elucidated more, and we can have a better understanding of, does this breath work induce reliably a state of awe? This is my favorite finding, to be honest, from the whole study. Heightened sense of awareness. This is really just an increased awareness of your body. How do you feel about body, emotions, where you are psychologically within your own head, cognitively? Everyone in the Wim Hof group said yes, this breathing intervention does increase a heightened sense of awareness, and in this sense, I would say alters conscious perception as well. In the paced breathing control group, it was kind of mixed, but the majority of people were not sure. It wasn't clear to them. However, obviously it was very clear to the people in Wim Hof group that this did change their awareness. And our last finding is on connection to the world. Again, we have some mixed results. 50% yes in Wim Hof group, 50% not sure, one no, one not sure, and then mostly no's in the paced breathing control group. So the last aspect of this study is that I wanted to crowdsource ideas for future researchers who are interested in studying Wim Hof Breathing Method. And so I had a section on the survey that asked, what could this be useful for? And these are some of the responses that we got. For Wim Hof breathing, and to use this as an emotion distancing technique. When you feel stressed, anxiety, you can do this to take you into a deeper sense of awareness, and in doing so, separate yourself from the intense perceived emotion. And you could also, participants said that it would be great to use this during times where you want to focus and concentrate, for example, maybe before an exam, and also to activate the respiratory system prior to exercise, which makes sense. The paced breathing group said that this could be good for deepening relaxation and maybe when you're experiencing some anxiety. Future research, would be great to, I think, look at emotional states, which we needed more solid research to support, and to take a deeper dive into the awe and astonishment as well, because I think that there could be some really cool stuff there. And with that said, I want to just thank Dr. Presti and Dr. Keltner for supporting me in this project, and especially Dr. Presti, who's been a really amazing support and has helped me significantly on this. Also to the participants, and thank you to you all as well.